One of the core mechanics that set the Pokemon TCG apart from other card games are the energy requirements Pokemon have to fulfill in order to be able to attack. However, in some eras of the Pokemon TCG, some of the Pokemon are printed with attacks that didn't require any energies at all for some or all of their attacks. And today, we're going to look over some of the best cards that had attacks with no energy requirement. And at number 10, we have Gastly from Diamond and Pearl Stormfront. Gastly is a Psychic-type basic Pokemon with 50 HP. For no energy at all, its Pitch Dark attack prevents your opponent from using any item cards from their hand during their next turn. For 1 Psychic Energy, this card's Trick Gas attack does 10 damage and switches out Gastly with one of your bench Pokemon. Back when this card came out, players were still allowed to attack on their first turn, meaning that item locking could start as early as the first turn of the game, limiting the cards your opponent had access to. Most decks used to have a very high number of item cards, so being able to entirely prevent your opponent from using them without much effort was always good in the Pokemon TCG. And it doesn't get much cheaper than attacking for no energy. Just blocking your opponent from playing cards won't be able to win you the game, however, which is why Gastly was mostly used in the early turns to slow down your opponent, while setting up attackers on the bench in the meantime. This was made especially easy due to Gastly's final evolution, Gengar, being one of the most powerful attackers at the time. Gengar from Stormfront had 2 powerful attacks. Shadow Room puts 3 damage counters on one of your opponent's Pokemon in play, and an additional 3 of the Pokemon of your choice as a Pokepower. Pokepowers were a mechanic used up to Black and White when they were replaced by abilities, but are functionally the same. Gengar's second attack, Poltergeist, has an energy requirement of 1 Psychic and 1 Colorless Energy, and does 30 damage for each trainer card in your opponent's hand, which is especially useful in combination with Gastly's Pitch Dark attack. On top of these 2 attacks, it also had a Pokepower itself. Fainting Spell makes you flip a coin if Gengar is knocked out, and if heads, would knock out the Pokemon that attacked as well. For a long period of time, Gastly managed to stay relevant, especially once more good Gengar cards were released in the upcoming years. But the next big step in Gastly's usability came with Heart Gold and Soul Silver Undaunted. Vileplume with the Allergy Flower Pokebody, another mechanic that eventually got replaced by abilities, prevents both players from playing any item cards for as long as it remains in play. This was a great card to combine with Gengar from Stormfront, which we already talked about before, but this time you wouldn't have to rely on your opponent having a lot of trainer cards in hand after you stop blocking their items with Gastly's Pitch Dark. Now, this attack could be used to slow down your opponent while setting up Gengar and Vileplume to start attacking with Poltergeist for a lot of damage multiple turns in a row. This deck quickly became successful, and Gastly, being one of the best bakes at the time that could still evolve, gets it a spot on our list. And at number 9, we have Pichu from Heart Gold and Soul Silver. Pichu is a Lightning-type basic Pokemon with 30 HP. Its Playground attack lets both players grab as many basic Pokemon as they like from their decks to fill up their bench. After that, Pichu is asleep, which actually works perfectly with its Pokebody, Sweet Sleeping Face. This Pokebody prevents Pichu from taking any damage from your opponent's Pokemon as long as it's asleep. Where sleep is a condition where a Pokemon can't attack or retreat and can wake up if it flips ahead at the end of a turn. This allowed for decks to make use of Pichu to set up their bench Pokemon, and even potentially preventing their opponent from taking a cheap knockout on its only 30 HP, which is incredibly low and very easy to knock out. It also came with no retreat cost, which made it easy to bring up a new Pokemon on the following turn if Pichu managed to wake up going back into your turn. When this card was first released, it didn't see too much play because the first couple of Heart Gold and Soul Silver still coexisted with most of the Diamond and Pearl era of cards, so Pichu wasn't really needed at the time. It first got popularized back in the 2011 World Championships when it was used as one of the primary setup tools for the runner-up deck of that year. The deck's main strategy revolved around Vileplume from Undaunted, Reuniqueless from Black and White, and Blissey Prime from Heart Gold and Soul Silver. Vileplume's Allergy Flower Pokebody prevents both players from using any item cards, which causes the game to be much slower because item cards are usually explosive tools that accelerate the game tempo. Reuniqueless has the Damage Swap ability, which allows you to switch damage counters between your Pokemon as often as you like during your turn. This was used to keep the various attackers that the deck used from being knocked out by putting the damage on bench Pokemon instead. Normally, your opponent would have been able to attack the bench Pokemon as well with gusting effects like Pokemon Reversal, a card that flips a coin and switches one of your opponent's bench Pokemon with one of their actives if the coin flip is heads. But thanks to Vileplume, the deck didn't have to worry about it, as it's an item card. Blissey Prime was the final piece of the combo thanks to its Blissful Nurse Pokepower, which heals all your Pokemon in play when it gets put into play, at the cost of discarding all energies attached to the healed Pokemon. Reuniqueless made it possible that you didn't have to discard the energies you were using to attack with by simply moving all damage counters away from it onto Pokemon that didn't have any energies. This powerful combo could even be reused thanks to the Seeker Support card, which allows both players to pick up one of their bench Pokemon and put it into their hand. After the World Championship that year, multiple other Vileplume-based decks made use of Pichu to set up, but none of them ever came close to the success that it was able to generate in the 2011 World Championships, which still cements it as one of the best attackers that doesn't require any energy. And at number 8, we have Chatot from Diamond and Pearl Majestic Dawn. Chatot is a 60 HP colorless basic Pokemon. Its Mimic attack can be used for no energy, and shuffles your hand into your deck before drawing cards equal to the amount that your opponent has in their hand. Its second attack, Chatot, requires 2 colorless energies and deals 20 damage. On top of that, it prevents defending Pokemon from retreating during your next turn. This card was especially popular shortly after release because most decks allocated some of their early turns to their setup and didn't start swinging right away. Chatot was one of the best Pokemon to attack with during those early turns, as it provided you with great consistency by being able to use all the cards in your hand to evolve Pokemon, attach energies, etc, etc, and then use it to refill your hand afterwards with its Mimic attack. Its second attack also came into play frequently because a lot of decks didn't play many cards to switch out their active Pokemon besides retreating. So even after drawing a lot of cards to set up, Chatter could be used to keep your opponent's weak starting Pokemon in the active until it would eventually get chipped down enough to start swinging with your main attacker, or until it was knocked out to go into a different attacker the turn after. Going into a new attacker after using Chatot was also made very easy due to its free retreat costs, meaning you didn't have to use any energy or other cards to get out of the active spot. Even when it was phased out during the later stages of existence, it always managed to find its way into decks that required a bit more setup, which makes it one of the most generic consistency cards at the time, and gets it a well-deserved spot on our list. And at number 7, we have Kingdra from Diamond and Pearl Legends Awakened. Kingdra is a 130 HP Stage 2 Water-type Pokemon. This card's first attack, Aqua Stream, costs 0 energies, and lets you pick any number of water energies from your discard pile, show them to your opponent, and shuffle them into your deck. For each energy that was shuffled in this way, this attack does 10 damage. Its second attack, Dragon Pump, deals 40 damage for 1 water energy, but if you discard 2 cards from your hand, it deals an extra 20 to the active and 20 damage to one of your opponent's bench Pokemon. Unlike many other cards with 0 energy attacks, Kingdra's Aqua Stream is usually not the attack you would use first, as it requires you to have multiple water energies in the discard pile before actually being useful by dealing some significant damage. Instead, Dragon Pump would almost always be the first attack to use, which is made relatively easy by its 1 energy requirement to then discard water energies and not just deal the extra damage, but also set up bigger Aqua Stream attacks later on. Back when this card was released, it was one of the best and most aggressive decks because being able to deal 60 damage to the active, 20 to the bench, and also have an additional attack with basically no damage cap, aside from the amount of energies you played in your deck, was incredibly powerful. On top of this, the rare candy item card works slightly differently than it does today. Nowadays, it allows you to evolve a basic Pokemon straight up into Stage 2 once the basic Pokemon has been in play for a turn, just like if you were to regularly evolve a Pokemon. Back then, it could be used immediately when a Pokemon was put into play, which meant the player going second could attack with Kingdra as soon as the first turn of the game. Most Kingdra decks were built to execute exactly that strategy to apply a lot of pressure on your opponent, but also having Aqua Stream to deal with some of the higher HP Pokemon that most decks would run as their main attacker. For a couple of sets, Kingdra decks were considered some of the best in the game, until eventually better attackers were released that gave it a run for its money. It still stuck around, especially when Kingdra Prime was printed later on down the line, due to Kingdra's aggressive nature, which could always pressure some of the slower decks. Kingdra's Spray Splash Pokepower added an extra layer of consistent damage to the deck by being able to put 1 damage counter per turn on an opponent's Pokemon of your choice. Its Dragon Stream attack requires 1 water energy and deals 60 damage, or just 20 if your opponent has any fire Pokemon in play. This attack was also decent, especially if there weren't any cards you wanted to discard for Dragon Pump, but you still needed attack to deal 60 damage. Kingdra is one of the best main attackers with an attack that requires no energy to ever be printed and gets a rightful spot on this list. And at number 6, we have Tyrogue from Heart Gold and Soul Silver. Tyrogue is a 30 HP basic fighting Pokemon. Its Mischievous Punch attack requires no energy and deals 30 damage and isn't affected by weakness or resistance on the defending Pokemon. After using this attack, Tyrogue is asleep. Just like Pichu before, Tyrogue also has the Pokebody Sweet Sleeping Face that prevents it from receiving any damage from attacks while it's asleep. Being able to deal some solid damage at the time for no energy made Tyrogue a solid inclusion in many decks to deal some chip damage for the main attackers were fully powered up. During its time in the meta, it also served one particular role that could make or break the game. Besides Pichu, another very relevant 30 HP Pokemon at the time was Cleffa from Heart Gold and Soul Silver. Its Eek attack shuffles your hand into your deck to draw 6 new cards before falling asleep. Just like Pichu and Tyrogue, it also comes with this Sweet Sleeping Face Pokebody to prevent any damage while being asleep. And this is where Tyrogue comes in. Should a Cleffa wake up, immediately after using its attack, players would respond with Tyrogue's Mischievous Punch during their turn to take an easy prize card and go ahead in the prize trade. As the starting rules were different back then and the player going first could immediately attack on their first turn, while still being able to use trainer cards, games could end by opening with Cleffa or Pichu and staring down at Tyrogue before even getting to play the game. This wasn't even the only scenario in which Tyrogue could end games before they really began. Thanks to the item card Plus Power, when used it adds an extra 10 damage to your attack on the turn, meaning that with multiple copies of Plus Power, Tyrogue could even take care of Pokemon with a little bit more HP. This ever-prevalent threat of Tyrogue could sometimes even force players to put Pokemon on their bench if they didn't even want to, just to prevent a donk, or a term used to describe losing via being unable to promote a new bench Pokemon once your active Pokemon was knocked out. Its influence in the early 2011-2012 season was immense, and gets it a rightful spot on our list. And at number 5, we have Alolan Vulpix from Sun and Moon Guardians Rising. Alolan Vulpix is a 60 HP basic water-type Pokemon. Its Beacon attack lets you search your deck for up to 2 Pokemon and puts them into your hand for no energy requirement. This card's second attack, Icy Snow, requires 2 colors energy and deals 20 damage. Alolan Vulpix quickly became a staple in a lot of decks that focus on setting up Stage 2 Pokemon, because Beacon made it easier to find the required Pokemon than having to use supporter or item cards to get them, especially when you consider that early game, manual energy attachments could be used to retreat, as you don't have to attach to Alolan Vulpix to use Beacon. Most prominently, it was used in combination with Decidueye GX, a Stage 2 Grass Pokemon from Sun and Moon expansion. Its Feather Arrow ability puts 20 damage on one of your opponent's Pokemon and can be used once for each Decidueye GX in play. Its Razor Leaf attack dealt 90 damage for 1 grass and 2 colors energy, and its GX attack, Hollow Hunt, lets you put 3 cards from your discard pile into your hand because the player could only use 1 GX attack per turn. Alolan Vulpix was made even better in these kinds of decks because its evolution from the same set perfectly fit into the strategy of Decidueye GX. Alolan Ninetales GX's Ice Blade attack deals 50 damage to any of your opponent's Pokemon for 2 colorless energy. Its Blizzard Edge attack does 106 damage for 2 water energy and 1 colorless, but also requires to discard 2 energies from itself. This attack was rarely used in Decidueye GX decks because they would often only run basic grass energies. Alolan Ninetales GX also came with the GX attack Ice Path GX, an attack that would move all damage counters from Ninetales to the defending Pokemon for 2 energies, making it a great tool to heal Alolan Ninetales by getting rid of the damage counters and converting them into damage. Ice Blade had great synergy with Feather Arrow because it allowed you to deal with low HP Pokemon on your opponent's bench, or simply set up damage for later turns. Some decks also ran Ninetales GX as their main attacker by making use of Aqua Patch, an item card that attaches a water energy from the discard pile to a bench water Pokemon. This deck would usually run the full amount of 4 copies of Alolan Vulpix, which made it even easier to make use of Beacon and the great consistency provided. Later down the line in Sun and Moon Lost Thunder, a new Fairy-type Alolan Ninetales GX was released with the ability Mysterious Guidance, which picks up 2 item cards from the deck once Alolan Vulpix was evolved into Alolan Ninetales GX. Its Snowy Wind attack does 70 damage to defending Pokemon and 30 to a bench Pokemon for 1 Fairy and 1 colorless energy. And its GX attack, Sublimation GX, immediately knocks out an Ultra Beast Pokemon. Ultra Beasts were a subcategory of Pokemon with the tag indicating they were an Ultra Beast below their name. With the release of this new Alolan Ninetales GX, many decks tried to fit in a package of Alolan Vulpix and Ninetales to make use of the Beacon for early setup, and then to evolve into Alolan Ninetales GX for even more consistency in item searches. Its history as one of the best early game consistency attackers cements Alolan Vulpix as one of the best attackers that didn't require energies. And at number 4, we've got Cleffa from Heart Gold and Soul Silver. Cleffa, as previously mentioned, is a 30 basic HP colorless Pokemon. Its Eek attack costs 0 energy and shuffles your hand into your deck before drawing 6 new cards. After using this attack, Cleffa is asleep. Its Pokébody's Sweet Sleepy Face prevents any damage done to Cleffa as long as it's asleep. And as we mentioned when we talked about Tyrogue before, Cleffa was one of the best early consistency Pokemon after the Pokemon TCG shifted to the Heart Gold and Soul Silver and upwards format back in 2011. Being able to draw 6 new cards while also potentially preventing damage done to it made it inclusion in almost every deck. Because of Cleffa's popularity and the amount of potential losses against Tyrogue's free 30 damage mischievous punch attack it caused, some players even opted to run Manaphy from Heart Gold and Soul Silver Unleashed. Its Deep Sea Swirl attack requires 1 colorless energy to shuffle your hand into your deck, and then draws a fresh 5 cards. This is very similar to Cleffa's Eek attack, but requires an extra energy and also draws 1 less card. Manaphy making it into many decks while being less powerful shows how good Cleffa was to provide consistency and how it shaped the format. Its impact on the game makes it easily one of the best zero attack energies to get on this list. And at number 3, we have Gyarados from Diamond and Pearl Stormfront. This Pokemon is a 130 HP Stage 1 Water type Pokemon. This card's Tail Revenge attack does 30 damage for each magic card from your discard pile for no energy costs. Its Wreak Havoc attack does 40 damage for 1 water and 1 colorless energy, and flips a coin until it lands on tails for the first time. For each of the heads flipped, the top card of your opponent's deck is discarded. Its final attack, Dragon Beat, does 100 damage for 2 water and 3 colorless energy, and flips a coin. If heads, an energy is discarded from each of your opponent's Pokemon. In terms of competitive use, only Tail Revenge was used as an attack, and thanks to how Gyarados worked, created a completely new form of playstyle in the Pokemon TCG. Up until then, normal decks would play around 10 energies and use their different Pokemon to evolve them and attack with them. Gyarados played very little energy, usually only around 5, with none of them being used to attack with Gyarados, but to support the deck instead. Some of the cards used were Cyclone Energy from Stormfront that provided 1 colorless energy, but makes your opponent switch their active Pokemon, a useful tool to bypass hard to knock out Pokemon in the active spot. Another energy used was Warp Energy, also from Stormfront, a card that provides 1 colorless energy and upon attaching to the active Pokemon, switches it with a bench Pokemon. A few years later, the arguably most suitable energy for the deck was released with Rescue Energy from Heart Gold and Soul Silver Triumphant. This card provides 1 colorless energy but will return the Pokemon it's attached to in all previous stages to the hand, making it much easier to keep putting out new attackers. This makes even more sense when we take a look at how the Gyarados deck worked. As explained before, most other decks would simply set up their attackers and attach energies to attack. Gyarados, however, had to get magic cards into the discard pile, which made it basically impossible to set up multiple attackers at once. as its basics couldn't be put onto the bench. A Stadium card released shortly after Gyarados in the Platinum expansion was the one that made the deck work. Broken Time Space allowed for both players to immediately evolve their Pokemon without having to wait the usual turn. Gyarados decks ran a large quantity of cards that would recover basic Pokemon from the discard pile to always be able to get up a new attacker on the following turn. Being able to deal a basic damage output of 90 damage that could be further increased by damage modifiers was very good at the time because most Pokemon only had 110 HP or lower, and it doesn't get much more energy efficient than doing it for no energy at all. It even became better with Mew Prime from Triumphant. Its Lost Link Pokébody allows Mew Prime to copy any attack from Pokemon that are in the Lost Zone as long as it has the necessary energies attached to it, which in Gyarados' case is no energy cards at all. Cards that enter the Lost Zone can usually not be used anymore, but Mew Prime is one of the very few cards in the history of the game that interacts with cards in there. Its See-Off attack lets you put one of your Pokemon from your deck into the Lost Zone for just 1 psychic energy, making it very easy to get Gyarados into the Lost Zone to be able to attack for 120 damage with all 4 magic cards in the discard pile. At the time, Mew/Gyarados was one of the best decks because it could deal high damage at the time for very little effort. This rightfully puts Gyarados as not only one of the best zero attack cards in the game, but one of the best decks at the time as well. And at number 2, we've got Spiritomb from Platinum Arceus. Spiritomb is a 60 HP basic Dark-type Pokemon. This card's Keystone Seal Pokébody prevents both players from using any item cards as long as this Pokemon is in the active spot. Its Darkness Grace attack requires no energy and lets you search your deck for a Pokemon that one of your bench Pokemon can evolve into, place it onto the Pokemon, and put 10 damage onto Spiritomb. It also comes with a second attack, Will-O-Wisp, which deals 10 damage for a Darkness energy. As soon as Spiritomb was released, it immediately found its place in a plethora of decks. The consistency was also able to provide by immediately grabbing Pokemon from the deck to evolve them in combination with its Pokébody that helped to heavily slow down aggressive decks by shutting them off from using item cards, made it a perfect fit for decks that required a little bit more of a setup before being able to fully swing or execute their strategy in general. Before its release, many decks were heavily focused on using item cards for their setup, but after Spiritomb became more popular, a lot of decks had to adapt their lists, as opening with the Spiritomb in the active spot was relatively easy and would lock players from using item cards for the first couple of turns. Supporter cards like Bebe's Search, a card that puts a card on top of the deck in order to search it for a Pokemon card and put it into your hand, began to see more play. Previously, this card had mostly been used in setup decks, but even some of the more aggressive decks now started to play multiple copies of it to not give up their entire early game to a Spiritomb. Its influence on the meta and the great utility that it provided for decks that could make use of it made Spiritomb one of the best cards at the time, and therefore one of the best no-energy attackers of all time. And finally, at number 1, we have Sableye from Diamond and Pearl Stormfront. Sableye is a 60 HP basic Dark-type Pokemon. This card's impersonated attack costs 0 energy and discards a supporter card of your choice from your deck to the discard pile. Afterwards, this attack copies the effect of that supporter. Its overconfident attack is an energy requirement of 1 Darkness energy and has a base damage of 10. However, if the defending Pokemon has less HP than Sableye, the damage becomes 40 instead. On top of these 2 attacks, it also has the Pokébody Overeager, which means a player that has Sableye in their active spot is forced to start the game. This makes Sableye one of the only 2 cards in the game that can manipulate which player goes first, even after the opening coin flip. Nowadays, this combination of attacks and Pokébody on Sableye might not seem incredibly powerful, with the starting player not being allowed to attack on their first turn. However, back when Sableye was around, the starting player was able to attack going first, making this combination even better. Even today, a card that lets you go first would be powerful, as most decks prefer to get the extra turn to be able to evolve before their opponent. Sableye's main use was being able to go first and then use Impersonate to use the supporter cards before your opponent, mitigating most of the downsides that came with going first, while still keeping all of the benefits. Overconfident also isn't anything to overlook, as it could end games before your opponent would even get to draw a card for the first turn. The way it worked is relatively simple. A Pokemon that had less HP than Sableye would be somewhere between 10 and 50, so all that Sableye needed to do was pick up an easy knockout and a way to deal 10 extra damage. Normally, an item card like Plus Power, an item card that adds 10 damage to the attack of a Pokemon, or Expert Belt, a tool card that gives a Pokemon that's attached to 20 extra HP and 20 extra damage, but also causes to give up 1 extra prize card when knocked out, would have been the cards of choice. But as previously mentioned, the player going first couldn't use any trainer cards. Players could, however, use Poképowers and Pokébodies to attach energy cards. The easiest way to pull off the turn 1 knockout was the Special Dark Energy, an energy card that provides a Darkness energy to the Dark-type Pokemon it's attached to, and adds an extra 10 damage to its attacks. This 2-card combo by itself would end any game where your opponent opened with just 1 Pokemon with 50 HP or less, an HP amount that was much more common back then than it is now. Even higher HP Pokemon can be dealt with thanks to Crobat G from Platinum and its Flashbite Poképower. When played, this Poképower allows you to place 1 damage counter on any of your opponent's Pokemon, letting you immediately knock out Pokemon that might have the same amount of base HP as Sableye, or even more. This powerful combination, all being on Sableye, led to one of the first ever emergency rotations to force Sableye out of the format. Having one of the most powerful Pokebodies in the game on top of providing one of the best free consistency attacks and a way to win games on the first turn makes Sableye not just one of the best zero attack Pokemon the Pokemon TCG has ever seen, but one of the most broken cards ever printed. Alright, and that's the video. Are there any other Pokemon we may have missed, or do you have any ideas for future videos similar to this one? If so, please let us know down in the comments below.